Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari, and today I'm joined by Gonzalo Cuervo, who is running in the 2022 Providence Mayoral election. Mr. Cuervo, how are you today?
Fantastic. How are you, Ray?
I'm doing great, and thank you for coming on the show. It's a pleasure of mine to have you on. Just diving right into it, you are running to be the next mayor of Providence in the 2022 Democratic primary. What influenced your decision to run for mayor?
Well, I'm running for mayor because I really love Providence. I was born here. I've been a community organizer here, a small business owner. I've had a number of different opportunities to grow as an individual, as a professional, as a political leader. And I think this is a fantastic city that offers many things, has a lot of creative energy, has a lot of great things going for it. But I also think that a lot of our community has been left behind. There are significant portions of our population, significant portions of our community that are struggling and have been struggling for years. They're struggling with low wages. They're struggling with increasingly high housing costs, with the poor educational system, and just an environment that is not conducive to their growth. And I think what we've seen is the middle class shrink considerably, and we've kind of turned into a tale of two cities, a city that's doing really well, a city that's doing fantastic things, and a city with folks who tend to be in almost a permanent underclass that are just struggling, just figuring out how to survive, how to get by. And this is unacceptable. It's unacceptable for folks who should be able to believe in a city that offers them the opportunity for personal and professional and family growth. And it's unacceptable for the folks who are doing okay, whose progress is also being held back by the limitations of a city with a stunted tax base and limited capacity for economic growth.
And this is going to be a competitive Democratic primary. There are already two official announcements from other candidates, Brett Smiley and City Councilwoman Yerva LaFortune from Ward 3. And then former Council President Michael Solomon announced that he'll formally announce in August. And there could be a few more candidates that may throw their hats in the race. What differentiates you from your opponents in this primary?
Well, here's the reason why I'm running. I have a lifelong track record. I've started as a community organizer when I was 19 years old on the south side of Providence. And since then, I have a track record of continuous engagement in working with community groups, working with small businesses, working on empowering people, empowering communities so that we can grow as a city, so that we can get ahead. And I also have a variety of experience in public administration. And I think that that combination of my own personal experiences as a person who grew up in a working class, poor family, as a person who has been involved in the community for almost 3 decades, and as someone who's had high-level jobs in city and state government, give me a very unique perspective at this point in my life to understand how it is that things actually get done and how we can turn a vision into action and not just aspirational talking points.
And now looking to the issues facing the city, one of the big issues in cities all around the country, as well as Providence, this past summer was the push to defund the police, and it's still going on now. There are a lot of debates about this issue, and some cities have even started to take funds away from their city police departments, and some of them had started to bring it back after seeing the negative effects that it had. Where do you stand on the issue of defunding the police in Providence?
Well, I think the issue of public safety is critical to any community, but particularly in a place like Providence, where we have so many economic and social disparities. I think we have to really deconstruct the word public safety. You know, for some people, public safety is looking out and seeing police officers patrolling their streets. And for other people, public safety is a fundamental sense of feeling that they are secure. They are secure. They have a secure, dignified housing. They have a living wage. They have the ability to care for their families. And I think that the call for defunding the police has been a very effective call, because it's forced communities all over the country, and particularly here in Providence, for us to have these conversations to say, what are we doing to ensure that public safety, or the public safety mechanisms that exist right now, the structures, are actually responsive to the needs of our community? I think that the traditional policing model that we've seen now has been stretched very thin, and we're expecting police officers to be social workers. We're expecting them to be mental health administrators. We're expecting them to do all these things that were never envisioned for that job. So when we talk about defunding the police or reforming the police, what we really need to be talking about is how are we really reimagining the role of public safety? And this also involves the fire department, because the fire department actually doesn't spend that much time putting out fires. They spend most of their time responding to personal crisis and personal emergencies that are health emergencies and are often mental health emergencies and overlap with a lot of the work that the police is called upon to do. So we really have to look at the bigger picture and say, how have these services evolved to respond properly to the needs of modern society, of an urban city that has a number of challenges that that impact it on a daily basis?
And the point of the interpretation of public safety has been brought up a few times over the course of a few episodes on the show when the topic of defund the police is brought up. And I always ask this follow up because a lot of people have different interpretations, like you had mentioned. Some say they want to have funding for mental social workers to respond to mental health crises, while there have been some politicians that want to defund and abolish the police, like State Senator Tiara Mack. She had called to defund and abolish on Twitter semi-recently. Just out of curiosity, for a quick follow-up, if elected mayor and the budget process is going on, could you assure that the police department's budget, the budget going into the police department, would not be reduced?
Well, I think what we need to do is we need to figure out how to allocate funds to best respond to the need of the communities, right? And I don't think that there is a definitive answer. I don't think that at this moment in time, there is a community anywhere in the United States that has entirely figured this out. So I think this is an ongoing conversation. I think it's a conversation of critical importance. I think it's important to recognize the fact that we need to change. We need to change the current system, but we also need to recognize that policing is a difficult job, and that there is always going to be a space for that role of policing. I think what we need to do is we need to be more responsive to the community, and we need to invest our public dollars, which are the taxpayers' dollars. They are the money of the taxpayers, of the people, in models that best respond to the needs of public safety in this community, in the city of Providence.
And I had mentioned at the first question that there were some cities that took away the money initially, like New York. They slashed $1 billion out of the police budget, and I believe Baltimore took a certain number of a little bit of money out of their police department budget. But we've seen cities like Baltimore bring money back into it after seeing crime go up. Are there any concerns that, say, we go with taking some of the money and allocating it to other departments, like getting more social workers, that in theory could be good? Is there concern that a spike in crime could happen, especially given that we're going into the summer, which statistically the crime is at its highest in the city?
Look, any amount of crime is unacceptable, but I think that when you jump into making decisions without involving the community, without involving stakeholders, without really studying what the impact is going to be, sometimes you get unexpected results. Sometimes you get results that can be counterproductive. I think this has to be a thoughtful process. I think it cannot be a knee-jerk process, but I think we really have to continue this conversation and not just let it be a talking point.
And now shifting to one of the noteworthy things the current mayor has done, Mayor Elorza. He signed an executive order that makes the first steps towards reparations in the city of Providence. Multiple things are being considered, like removing names of people who were involved in slavery and other injustices off of buildings, and an idea that had been adopted in Evanston, Illinois, where they use tax revenue from legalized marijuana and fund housing as a form of reparations. If elected mayor, do you plan to move forward with those initial plans of reparations that Mayor Elorza has started?
I think it's important, again, to have this conversation because the African-American community in particular has suffered from generations of neglect and isolation and lack of economic opportunities. And so this is a very important conversation. I have to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what the best way to go about this doing. I know there are a lot of different communities that are using very interesting and fantastic models, but I think it's a fundamental issue of fairness. And we know that we have a sizable African-American community in the city of Providence, and that this is a community that has suffered the results of generations of racism, of neglect, of economic lack of opportunity, and that needs to be addressed. But that needs to be looked at in the context of what are we doing to create more opportunities, to open doors for the African-American community and for other communities of color that have also been impacted by systemic racism, and simply by an economic system that was not designed to favor them to begin with. So I think that I applaud the mayor's efforts, and I know that he's done this in consultation with a variety of prominent and thoughtful leaders. And I think it's certainly something that we have to look at and build upon.
Do you see yourself potentially using, like, because I know that there's currently a push to legalize marijuana in Rhode Island. I had mentioned in the Evanston, Illinois, that city, they're using the legalized marijuana tax revenue. Would there be any plans to use that revenue for something similar in Providence?
Well, between legalizing recreational use of marijuana and a municipality using revenue from that marijuana sales, there are like 16 steps. So, I think that's a fantastic model that they're using, but, that's very hypothetical at this point, because we haven't legalized recreational marijuana in the state of Rhode Island yet.
And now shifting the topic for a moment, a huge issue facing the city of Providence is our city's pension system. That's around $2 billion in the hole. Millions of dollars in the budget is dedicated to just stopping it from going further into the hole and trying to stop a potential bankruptcy, or that could even lead to receivership. How would you fix the city's pension system as mayor?
Well, I think the pension system is something that will require multiple steps. I think Mayor Elorza's proposal to float pension obligation bonds is certainly a proposal that's worthy of review and worthy of following up on. I think it makes sense for the first time possibly ever, as pension obligation bonds have usually been frowned upon in the public finance world, because usually the spread between the cost of borrowing money and the rate of return on the money when it's invested has been so narrow that if there's any dip in the stock market, all of a sudden the city's underwater and it's actually losing money. I think for the first time in many, many years, possibly in our lifetimes, interest rates are so low that it's so affordable to borrow money that it might make sense. But obviously, this is something that requires state approval, and I know that they're looking at it now, and I'm hopeful that there's an opportunity to do something with that. That would be significantly helpful. But there's also a lot of other factors involved. Where the Supreme Court of Rhode Island has indicated that we can't go back and reopen negotiations with current retirees. So that blocks off one avenue. And the truth is, if we were to entirely eliminate pension benefits from current employees and new employees coming in, we would probably only impact 10 to 12% of the costs, of the current costs. So what we need to do is we need to look at ways to reduce the unfunded liability, to ensure that annual payment does not continue to outrun inflation. And we also need to grow the tax base. And I think that's something that we haven't really looked at is, 40%, more than 40% of our current tax base is tax exempt. So that's 40% of the land and buildings in our city do not pay taxes. And so the only avenue that we have is to increase and expand the tax base in the city of Providence by encouraging development, by building more housing, which we need, by the way, for affordable housing and workforce housing, middle income housing. And we need to expand the tax base so that we're not relying on the family that owns a single family or a triple decker to basically underwrite the city's legacy costs, thanks to decisions that were made decades ago irresponsibly.
And you had mentioned certain parts of the tax base paying their fair share. That is an interesting point, because you hear that Brown University and Providence College, they have a lot of land in the city and they don't really pay their fair share in taxes. Do you have any plans, if elected mayor, to try to make them pay their fair share?
Well, here's what I think. I think there's an opportunity to work with these institutions to increase their contributions, both monetary contributions and in lieu of contributions. And I'll give you an example. What New Haven has been able to accomplish with the Yale University is remarkable, especially when you compare the fact that New Haven is a relatively small city. The partnerships that they have developed, the amount of revenue that they receive from Yale, in addition to the amount of services that Yale provides the community, is really a model for Providence. I think Brown University in particular, they've gotten a free ride for a long time. And last year during the pandemic, when our businesses were going under and our people were suffering from unemployment and from all the effects of COVID, health effects, social effects, community effects, the Brown University's endowment made $500 million in profit on the stock market. Like that's that was last year's budget for the entire city of Providence, by the way, excluding the school department. They made that on the stock market in their endowment. So I think that there's a greater role for them to play. And I think that we need to have a mayor who's going to hold them accountable and who isn't going to have longstanding ties and relationships with Brown University and Lifespan and these other organizations, who will have the independence and the ability to hold them accountable. And the idea is to create a model that benefits the city, but that also benefits the institutions, because we want them to continue to grow. We acknowledge the benefits that they bring to their host community. We know they bring a lot of economic activity. They bring cultural, educational, academic excellence. I think it's great that they're here, but I think that they need to do more.
And kind of circling back to the pension system before I move on to the next topic, an idea that has been floated around that goes a little unmentioned in conversations on the issue of the pension system is doing something that Cranston, the city of Cranston, did 10 years ago, which was leaving the pension business entirely and each employee having their own individual 401ks that they themselves would own, thus taking that burden off the city. And then that money the city was funneling in our budget could be used for basic city services that, you know, many in your party want, like funding public education, roads, job programs, and et cetera. Would you consider an idea like that was done in Cranston 10 years ago and had dramatically helped that city's financial situation?
Well, here's the thing, Ray. The challenge is that type of move can only be done moving forward. You can't do that to existing pensioners. And the challenge in the city's pension problem is a legacy challenge. This is a long-standing problem that has been dragging along thanks to decisions that were made in the 80s and 90s when we were basically giving away the store. And so here's the thing. We're currently paying approximately $90 million a year towards our pension system from the annual budget, which is about almost 20% of our budget at this point. Even if we could do that legally, even if we could put every single current and future employee in a 401k and privatize their pensions, that would probably reduce $10 to $12 million. We'd still be paying $80 million a year, and it would still continue to grow. Why? Because a lot of those older pension obligations that we have, a lot of those retirees had very, very generous benefits, very generous cost of living increases, and people live a long time. People live a long time. You know, if you retired when you were 55 years old, you know, you're going to collect your pension for a long time. So I think that those types of solutions are make for fabulous talking points, but when you really get into the details, you realize that there's really no substance there.
And now looking to the issue of education, there are a lot of sub-issues that are clouded over by this main issue of education. Some that come up are the expansion of charter schools, school choice, the state takeover, and et cetera. Just out of curiosity, what would you do differently in terms of fixing Providence's school system as mayor?
Well, the Providence school system has been failing our students for many years. This isn't a new development. This is something that has been known for many years. You know, we every decade or 2 decades, you know, we commission a study and we are aghast because somebody from the outside told us something that we've known forever. Now we need to change that reality because we're losing a lot of human talent. We're losing a lot of potential for growth and for a dynamic, fantastic homegrown economy. And I think what we need to really do is we need to change the culture and climate in our schools. And this begins with the relationship between our students, our families, our administrators, and our teachers. And I think what we've had is a lot of the conversation that's taken place around school reform in Providence has been entirely adversarial. And it's all about pointing fingers. And it's all about saying it's this person's fault, it's that person's fault, it's this person's fault. And I think we need to look at models of other places. I mean, look, if we look, Lawrence, Massachusetts, which by the way is, you know, 50 miles away from here, 60 miles away from here, they had a school takeover of their schools. Their schools were doing terrible. It's a much smaller city. It's about the size of Warwick, but their demographics are almost identical to that of Providence. And they had a very different experience with their school takeover model. And they've actually seen some results from the turnaround. And I think that we have to stop living in a vacuum and imagining that Providence schools and that education in Providence and in Rhode Island is like this unique thing that doesn't exist anywhere else. And we really have to implement a lot of best practices that have worked in other places. We can't continue to reinvent the wheel and then throw our arms up and give up after a year or two because we lost a superintendent or we lost a commissioner of education. We need to have the political will, and we need to get the buy-in from all the stakeholders, students, teachers, administrators, and parents, especially the parents, especially the families.
And you had mentioned that they had a takeover, and we're currently under a takeover by the state. Where do you stand on the school takeover? Should we keep it going? Should we get out of it? There's mixed reactions on that
I think
when
what
it
we,
comes to the other
I
politicians.
think what everybody expects to see is some results, and I don't think we've seen any results so far. I don't think there's been any movement. I think there's a lot of stagnation. There's a lot of finger pointing, and we need to see results. And whether the schools are controlled by the state or they're controlled by the city, at the end of the day, the state takeover, the whole theory behind the state takeover is that the state would have flexibility and opportunity to do things that the city could not do. And we haven't seen any of that yet. What we've seen is a lot of finger pointing and a lot of acrimony. And I think people in Providence, our students, our families deserve better, and they're ready to see some results.
And just while we're still on the topic of education, two other solutions are brought up a few times in this over a few episodes of Ray-ality TV, and that is the expansion of charter schools and school choice. Where do you stand on the expansion of charter schools and school choice in Providence?
I think charter schools have a role to play in our public education. I think we should look at charter schools as a tool in the toolbox. I'm very concerned about the expansion of charter schools because, especially when we have larger charter school models where they begin to significantly consume the resources that we have for our schools and our students. You know, when the dollars follow the student, and you have a cohort of students that move into the charter system, you know, those dollars leave. You can't, if the school system loses, you know, if a school population goes down by a certain percentage, you can't have half a teacher in a classroom. You can't turn off the electricity in half the building. You can't lay off half the janitors. So you still have these fixed costs, and yet we're losing this money. I think we need to do what we originally intended to do with charter schools, was to learn from their best practices, to learn at their ability to develop a positive climate and culture, to learn at the way that they engage parents, and to learn from their successful models in site-based management. And I think there's an opportunity to do that, but we are always going to have a public education system, and we can't continue to run away from our responsibility of improving and building upon that public education system.
So more of like a balance between charters and public, and like not letting the for-profit charter schools take over.
I think we need to fix our public schools. I think we need to focus on fixing our public schools. Our public schools have been hurting for a very long time, and we're always looking for solutions to come from the outside, whether those solutions are bringing in more charter schools or bringing in people from other parts of the country that are going to somehow miraculously turn things around. I think we need to look from the inside. We need to build our relationships with our parents. We need to identify and promote the fantastic educators that we have in our system. Now we have Dr. Montañez, who's the interim superintendent. Dr. Montañez, he didn't fall out of the sky. He's been in our system for almost 3 decades. He's an unbelievable person. And I can guarantee you that there are a dozen more Dr. Montañez in the Providence school systems that can do amazing things for us.
And now circling back to noteworthy things Mayor Elorza has done as mayor, one of them was making Providence a sanctuary city. A lot of the concerns from critics of that decision is how it's gone around the country in other sanctuary cities. For example, in San Francisco, California, a sanctuary city saw Kate Steinle get shot and killed by an undocumented immigrant who had been deported multiple times in the past and was being protected by that city's sanctuary city status. What's your stance on Providence being a sanctuary city? And if something like that were to occur in Providence, would there be any would there be any actions considered being taken, or looking at the status and reconsidering it?
Well, here's the thing. There is no status. That's a conservative talking point. That's a conservative. Calling a city a sanctuary city is a conservative talking point. The city of Providence has a long history of respecting human dignity and human rights, regardless of a person's immigration status. We can't change federal laws at the local level. We have to respect the dignity and the rights of every single individual who lives here. And that goes way back. Mayor Cicilline, before he was a congressman, almost 20 years ago, approved the use of consular ID cards from Guatemala and Mexico as a valid ID in the city of Providence. The police department for years, under several administrations, has had different directives in how to address the issue of relaying information to ICE and dealing with folks who may or may not have normalized status in the country. We have to look to ensure that we are respecting and upholding the dignity, the security, and the public safety of all our residents, regardless of their status. Calling a city whatever you want to call it, that's a conservative talking point. That's really not something I would even engage.
So the city legally is not a sanctuary city. That's just a term that was brought up.
That's a conservative talking point to generate likes and outrage in certain circles. I think we need to focus on making sure that our families are safe and making sure that our families are treated with dignity and they have access to everything that is afforded under the Constitution and under the city charter.
And a follow-up that I usually ask in this topic is if someone who is here being protected by, in this context, the status would, and if someone who is being protected by the status commits a crime, would that be where the line is drawn?
I think anybody who commits a crime and enters into the criminal justice system is subject to the laws of the criminal justice system. I think there's a pretty big difference between a person who is a criminal or accused of a crime and the person who's simply going about their life trying to be productive and provide for their families.
And now looking at another, while we're still looking on some of the things that have been done in this term for Mayor Elorza, one of them, a lot of mayors around the country have joined Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, including Mayor Elorza. There are a lot of debates around how this would be paid for. There are talks about philanthropologists paying for it, like the CEO of Twitter, Jack from the CEO of Twitter. That's been one of the conversations of he might be able to help fund it. There are also talks that it could be maybe Brown or PC paying their fair share. Where do you stand on if Providence should commit to a guaranteed basic income program for residents?
Here's what I think. I think we need to focus on creating solutions now. You know, we can let people talk about what the future is going to look like. We need to create solutions for people now. We have people now who are being priced out of the housing market. We have people who can't earn a living wage in our city and have to move away and have to move to more affordable communities. And we have people who are facing significant economic challenges right now. And so we need to find solutions to that right now. Whether or not universal basic income is going to work years from now, whether or not I'll leave that up to the academics and the philanthropists to figure out. We need to find solutions right now for the people of Providence right now.
Do you personally see the guaranteed basic income being one of the solutions in a Mayor Cuervo administration?
Anything is possible, but I need to work with the resources and the people and the funding that we have today, that we're going to have on the first Monday of January of 2023, when the next mayor is put into office. So everything else is a theoretical exercise.
And in January 2023, now looking at the city council composition for a second, the leadership could look very different January 2023 because Council President Igliozzi will be term limited. This could mean that maybe Council President Pro Tempore Pedro Espinal might end up being council president. Would you be in favor of Councilman Espinal being council president come January 2023 if elected mayor?
I'm going to be ready to work with the city council regardless of who the president is, regardless of the council's makeup. The council is made up of people who are elected, and every ward has the opportunity to elect a member of the city council. And I will work closely with the 15 members of the Providence City Council who are elected, and whoever they choose amongst themselves to be the leadership, I guarantee you that we'll have a fantastic relationship regardless of who that is.
And one of the newest members of the 15-member city council will actually be in my ward, in Ward 15. We had a special election where I want to say now Councilman Oscar Vargas, since he won the primary and he's facing no competition in the general election, aside from write-in candidates, but historically that doesn't result in wins. So now Councilman Oscar Vargas will represent our ward and will be up for re-election come 2022. That special election had some big endorsements. We've seen Senator Sam Bell endorse Doris de Los Santos. We've seen Senator Frank Chacon endorse Oscar Vargas. And there was a lot of other council members and elected officials in the city that were endorsing different candidates. It was all spread apart. Did you have anybody that you specifically supported in that special election?
No, I think that in that election was a very interesting landscape, because there were many people who had very strong operations and strong relationships and longstanding ties, or were appealing candidates. I think Oscar worked harder.
And since he's running for re-election in 2022, do you have any plans to support soon-to-be Councilman Vargas in 2022?
I have plans to become the next mayor of Providence.
So kind of a wait and see?
No, I'm focused on becoming the next mayor of Providence.
Okay. And now looking at the final question that I ask everyone on the show, this is my favorite question to ask because I always get different answers and it's a great question to ask. In your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
It's beaches and it's hardy, resilient, and creative population.
And I usually ask this follow-up sometimes when I interview candidates for running for mayor of Providence or city council. Just a follow-up on that. What do you think Providence is best known for?
I think Providence is the city's creative capital, and I think we have unbelievable human resources. We have a dynamic cultural scene, art scene, hospitality scene, and I think we need to build that up, and we need to get people excited about that again.
That most definitely, and PVD Fest is coming back, and I think they're going to be doing multiple in a year now. That seems pretty interesting, and I'm looking forward to it because one of the schools I actually used to go to used to partner with PVD Fest because it was a performing arts charter school in the city of Providence. Mr. Cuervo, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure of mine to have you on.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click the subscribe button down below, along with the post notification bell icon to the right of it. I'm Raymond Bakari, and I'll see you on the next episode.